There's always been this sort of sense of, well, schools have got nothing to be frightened of from Ofsted. I had 9 Ofsted inspections, and there was never one inspection where I thought, oh, this is going to be a breeze. Ever. We've got an accountability system that people are terrified of, quite frankly. Whether you're teaching tiny little ones or whether you're teaching teenagers, it's all about the relationships that you build, the challenge that you can provide in the classroom. The way that teachers will build greater respect is through being professionally as competent as they possibly can be, as knowledgeable as they possibly can be. For me, that's the way that we raise the status of the profession. We really think deeply about what we're doing and reflect deeply on what we're doing. When you look at the stats from places like NFER, it's not pay that is the big thing that demotivates teachers. There is workload, there's behaviour, there's lack of flexibility, and there's also an increasing lack of teacher agency. The problem with having one-size-fits-all teaching is that children aren't one-size-fits-all. And I think this is why we've got such a dramatic increase in the number of children who are being labelled. That is at the heart of what needs to be at the heart of the white paper. How do we, as a profession, find a way through for every child to be a successful learner? I completely subscribe to that notion of classrooms where, as I say, anything feels possible. And for me, that is what Learning Without Limits is about. It's not about ability labelling. It's not about predetermining what a child can do.
Welcome to Trust Matters Lessons in Leadership. In this episode, we're joined by Dame Alison Peacock, CEO of the Chartered College of Teaching, whose work has helped shape national conversations around teacher professionalism, inclusion, and evidence-informed practice. Over a career spanning classrooms, school leadership, research, and national policy, Alison has consistently championed the idea that teachers are experts and that education systems work best when teachers are trusted and empowered to make decisions in the best interests of children. In this conversation, we explore the changing status of the teaching profession, why retention is about far more than workload and pay, and whether accountability pressures have left teachers feeling less trusted and more constrained than ever before. We also discuss inclusion, SEND, and Alison's internationally recognised Learning Without Limits work, alongside the relationship between research, policy, and classroom practice. Finally, we look to the future of the profession, from the role of AI in education to what still gives Alison optimism about the next generation entering teaching. If you enjoyed the episode, don't forget to like, subscribe, and leave us a review. Well, firstly, welcome to the podcast, Alison. It's an absolute pleasure to have you with us today. Just to give the listeners a bit of context, could you tell us a little bit about your career journey so far?
Thank you. Well, it's great to be here. My career journey, I have been a teacher forever. So I trained to be a primary teacher, and at that time there weren't any primary jobs. So I moved back home to Hertfordshire, and I saw a job in the local paper over the summer holidays for a teacher of general subjects, years 7 to 9, in a secondary school in Harlow, which was just down the road from where I was living. And so I applied for it because I thought, well, I've got to have a job. And I went for the interview, and the competitive streak sort of cut in. So I was competing for this job, wanting it, but equally quite terrified at what I was seeing, because it was an 800 strong comprehensive school, 11 to 16. Yeah, that was quite a baptism of fire. So I got the job. When I got the job, I remember sort of thinking, oh my goodness, now what? And then I moved from there to, after a year I was getting married, moved up to the Midlands, and then joined a big community college, 1,400 students there, came back down to Hertfordshire, joined the advisory service, and then we had our children. And I think it's important for people to realise that I took a career break at that point, because I think women always think, well, we've got to have it all. We've been told we can have it all. So we've got to try and have a family and also juggle work and all the rest of it. And as it was at the time, I was fortunate enough that, we were poor, but we could manage with just my husband's salary. And so I stayed at home with our 2 daughters and did supply teaching, did my master's at Cambridge, all part-time until I went back to, so I had 7 years out of teaching. And as I say, I just think that's important to mention because, I've subsequently gone on to get a damehood and do everything that I'm doing in education. And my sense is that the time that I had with my children when they were young, I was studying early years and special educational needs at Cambridge. I used to go on a Wednesday afternoon through to the evening, and then I would be trying to fit studying around looking after two young children. But that's nowhere near as difficult as teaching all day long and trying to study. But my passion then for really understanding about how children learn, and particularly how children who find learning difficult learn and how we can keep the door open for all those children, that sort of was born at that point. And then I went back and took on a tiny little class of 3 to 7-year-olds, all in the same class, in a little tiny village school. My mum lived over the way, literally, and so she looked after our youngest daughter while I was teaching 4 days a week in this tiny school. And then I moved on into other primaries, became a teaching school head, and then started the chartered college. So my whole career has been centered around children, understanding learning, teaching, but not teaching in a kind of usual format because essentially the job's the same,
Hmm.
whether you're teaching tiny little ones or whether you're teaching teenagers. It's all about the relationships that you build, the challenge that you can provide in the classroom, um, and also just being aware of yourself and the impact you have on those around you, I think is really important.
And you spent most of your career championing the idea that teachers are experts. When you look around at society now and the view of teachers, do you think that is the general consensus? And if not, what do you think most people misunderstand about the fact that teaching is an expert career?
Well, teaching is an expert career, but I think there's an awful lot in society right now when you look around that is deeply alarming. I mean, literally, I've just come in to speak to you today. I've come in on the train into Liverpool Street, and on that train route, as you're coming into the station, there's been a series of murals that have been on the wall for many years with all of the flags around the world. And this morning, as we came in, I noticed they'd all been defaced, or they'd been pulled down, or there'd been graffiti put on them. And I just thought, how sad. So I think there are lots of challenges in society right now. And I think the idea that education is somehow optional instead of your route towards becoming the best person that you can be, the assumption that somehow that it's okay to argue against any form of authority, but to argue against school and argue against teachers and to kind of denigrate the work that they do is deeply sad. But equally, I visit loads and loads of schools. It's a really brilliant part of my job. I don't have to, I just choose to because it just really fuels me with a sense of optimism and what's possible, and being with children and young people and teachers is great for that. But whenever I visit schools or colleges, I find brilliant people doing brilliant things, reasons to be hopeful and cheerful about our system. So whatever the overall kind of sense about the status of the profession is, my feeling is at the Chartered College of Teaching, our job is to constantly champion great practice, to constantly talk up the wonderful things that are going on in our schools. And where there are, areas for improvement, which there will always be, because there's always going to be areas for improvement wherever you work, whatever you do, how can we help those people as opposed to how can we blame them? How can we help the system get better? And how can we improve the lack of equity in the system?
And you mentioned there about the Chartered College of Teaching championing the idea of raising the status of teaching. When you speak to teachers, what do you think genuinely needs to change for them to feel more professionally respected and to have more, I guess, pride over their work? I know so many teachers are proud of what they do, but I think there's a real tension maybe between the public perception of teaching, especially post-pandemic. I think in the media there was quite a lot of rhetoric around teaching, the strikes. What needs to change for that to feel like a more cohesive relationship between teaching and the public?
So I think that's a very complex issue. If we think about the pandemic for a moment, I had hoped during the pandemic, that because teachers went above and beyond, I mean, they really did, um, that the public would forever be grateful. But it's almost like the Wizard of Oz. It's almost like because they were beamed into people's living rooms and they saw their children responding to Mrs. Jones teaching phonics or whatever it was almost like the mystique was taken away. The reality is the way that teachers, and this is at the heart of what we do at the Chartered College, the way that teachers will build greater respect is through being professionally as competent as they possibly can be, as knowledgeable as they possibly can be. I think back to when I was teaching, too often, particularly before I started studying and engaging with Learning Without Limits, in my early days of teaching, I would do what I thought intuitively was the right thing to do. My teacher training was a PGCE, so it's post my degree. So it was only a year, and then you've got teaching practice interspersed in that. So the amount of theoretical training that I had through a PGCE, although it was excellent, I went to the University of Warwick, it was nevertheless limited. And also, when you're training to teach, there is so much that you've got to assimilate in terms of how you're going to present in the classroom and the resources that you need. And anyway, so actually remembering theory, it's quite hard to absorb all that in your initial teaching year. So my sense is that the more that we can enable teachers to build a sense of knowledge, expertise, understanding, to learn through collaboration with colleagues, to realize that when they arrive in school, they're not the finished product. And I think probably people through the early career framework now realize that there's a lot more to learn. But, certainly when I started teaching, there was almost the kind of defense that was like, well, I've trained, I'm qualified. I know what I'm doing. Well, whether I knew what I was doing or not, it was a defense that one used. So if you're saying if you've got a parents' evening and a parent is challenging you about a decision that you've taken in the classroom, if you can stand your ground because you understand the research, the reasons why that approach is more likely to be successful than another approach, because you've got experience, because you've tried things, because in your school this is something that you can see is really working, you're able to explain the position without being defensive. If, on the other hand, you have just randomly made a decision because it felt like that was going to be the best way of doing something, but you haven't really got anything to back it up, you're less likely to build the kind of professional respect that I think the profession deserves to be held in. So, I would say this because I lead the Chartered College, but my sense is the more that we can have teachers that gain qualifications, who can explain their thinking, who are really reflecting on their practice, who are reading widely, who are listening to other colleagues, who are really building that kind of phronesis that is the existence of the knowledge of the classroom, the tacit knowledge of the classroom, combined with the theoretical knowledge. That is very powerful. And so that's why we've started the chartered route, because there used to be ASTs back in the day, advanced skills teachers, and those teachers, this was back in 2010, Michael Gove got rid of them, but they were paid a premium for remaining in the classroom. And so it didn't mean that the only way to get promotion was to be promoted beyond the classroom. You could be promoted for being a great teacher and for sharing your expertise with others. That's what I would love chartered teachers to do. And at the moment, there's not a pay scale related to chartered teachers, although academies have the freedom to promote their teachers, and many do. So when teachers become chartered, there are often promotion prospects that come with that. But for me, that's the way that we raise the status of the profession. We really think deeply about what we're doing and reflect deeply on what we're doing.
And you mentioned promotion there, and I think one of the things that often comes up around this is the recruitment and retention crisis of teachers. Promotion is one of the ways that you keep people in the profession. The other way that people speak about is pay. I think two of the big things that often come up are workload and pay for the reasons that people leave. Why do you think there is such a recruitment and probably more a retention issue in teaching? And what are some of those things that need to be addressed for people to actually stick around?
So I was a member of the Teaching Commission with Mary Bousted, and we looked at this issue and we took a lot of evidence from witnesses. And when you look at the stats from places like NFER, it's not pay that is the big thing that demotivates teachers, although everybody's obviously happy to get paid more. It's quite often low-level behaviour. When I'm talking about that, I mean low-level behaviour disruption that is quite often a kind of driving factor towards saying, "Look, I can't do this anymore." It's a lack of flexible working opportunities, particularly for women in that so-called motherhood penalty era where they may be having children and feeling that they want to go back to work, they need to go back to work, but actually managing the childcare becomes increasingly difficult. Or maybe they've got caring responsibilities, and it's not just women. But that lack of flexible working, and I think particularly post-pandemic when so many people, returned to work but didn't return to work in the way that they had worked before the pandemic. So there was much more sense of being able to work from home. You can't do that as a teacher, but you could do things like have PPA time away from the workplace and really focus your attention on work without the distractions of being called for cover and what have you. So there are things that we can do, and there are things that the college is recommending. We've engaged in research around that. So I think flexible working is big. I think behavior issues are issues that are worrying a lot of teachers. Parental complaints. It's much easier to email a teacher if you're fueled with a nice glass of something over dinner than it used to be in terms of, you can just email the teacher. And it's really hard when you receive those kind of messages from parents. And they might be complaining about something like a plimsoll going missing, or they might be complaining about something much more fundamental. But even so, whatever it is, it's horrible and it's intrusive. And though those kind of intrusions on your life beyond school mean that as a teacher, I kind of feel like well, certainly in my case, your life becomes your job. It all melds into one. I mean, honestly, as a teacher, the only time that I would truly switch off would be in the summer holidays, sort of about 2 weeks after the beginning of the summer holidays would start. I'd start to kind of go, "Ugh." And then there'd be the whole kind of almost resenting the fact that you had to sort of grind the gears and get yourself back up to term time pressure of working. So there is workload, there's behaviour, there's lack of flexibility, and there's also an increasing lack of teacher agency. And that is due to the fact that in the name of reducing workload, and I'm not criticising this, but I think sometimes it can go too far. Buying in schemes of work, agreed lesson plans, centralized PowerPoint systems, all of those kinds of things. If you feel that you're expected just to be in delivery mode and you can't stop and talk with the children and build the relationships that you need to build because you're constantly, are you on slide 10 yet? I think that's another disincentive. Or at least maybe it's a disincentive for the kind of teacher I want teachers to be.
And when you reflect back on when you were a teacher compared to teachers now, how much more restricted do you think they feel? You speak about the lack of autonomy there, but there's also that conversation around the accountability culture, performance pressures. How much of an impact does that have on the restriction that teachers feel in the classroom?
I think it varies. So I think we've got such a mixed system right now. So we've got schools that are in multi-academy trusts where everything is pretty much mandated and centralized. We've got small schools, 4,000 of them, that are church schools all over the country that don't have any kind of. I mean, if you could say they're in a multi-academy trust, which is led by the Church of England, but essentially they're not. They're independent of that sort of leadership. So they're local authority schools with a diocese. You've got schools that are still standalone schools that aren't academies. You've got standalone academy. You've got all sorts of different schools. So the system is as diverse as children are. But I think where you've got teachers who are expected to follow the script, in some cases that can feel very constraining. On the other hand, there are teachers, I'm meeting teachers who, straight off their training, kind of want to walk into classrooms and be told, this is what you're doing today. So there has to be a kind of middle ground, I think. My sense is that the middle ground comes with teachers seeing themselves as compassionate leaders of learning. So yes, of course, they want the children to engage with the curriculum, to engage with assessments, to be following out tasks and all kinds of things. But we also want them to find those tasks and things that they're doing meaningful. And we want them to be in an environment where there's the opportunity to experience flow. So that sense of suddenly looking up and, oh my goodness, is it already playtime? Can't we stay in? Can't we carry on? Those kinds of experiences are carried out in classrooms where everybody feels really valued, everybody feels part of the process, nobody feels written off. And the problem with having one size fits all teaching is that children aren't one size fits all. And I think this is why we've got such a dramatic increase in the number of children who are being labelled, the number of children who parents are kind of caught in the system. They need to get the diagnosis in order that they can get the funding, in order that they can get the support for their child. So there's a kind of treadmill that everybody's on to try and it's such a deficit treadmill because it's a treadmill that's about proving how bad your child is, which is the last thing you want to do. But it's also, as a parent, your sense is, I need to get the best for my child. And teachers want the best for their children as well. So we all engage in this game.
And to that point, you've often spoken about inclusion being central to a successful education system. We've had obviously the recent white paper, which tries to address that, what you were just discussing around SEND. What do you think needs to change for there to genuinely be improvements in the sector around that? And when you reflected on the white paper, what were some of the things that you thought, great idea, that could work, and other places where you thought, actually, this is going to increase the burden on teachers and schools and maybe won't actually have incremental impact?
So I think we can't have everything. So, I mean, when I read the white paper and when I listened to ministers speaking about it, and I met with Georgia Gould, and I was really taken with her genuine excitement about what could happen in schools, and she's talking about joy needs to return to classrooms. Well, I'm not going to argue with that. Fabulous. But while we've also got a punitive accountability system, alongside expecting more from teachers and expecting that we can build relationships with parents so that the school can, arguably return to being pivotal in the local community. It talks in the white paper about schools being the anchor in their communities. That is asking a tremendous amount. There's something between 96 and 104, and there's, I have counted myself, demands in the white paper for action. And you combine that with the curriculum and assessment review, there is a lot of change on the agenda. Now, I'm not frightened of change. I think all of these things are important, but we have to be realists. And while we've got an accountability system that people are terrified of, quite frankly, and it's interesting, isn't it? I mean, I've had lots of conversations with Martin Oliver and with senior Ofsted teams and so on. But then I've also spoken with senior Ofsted colleagues for quite a number of years of different kind of regimes. There's always been this sort of sense of, well, schools have got nothing to be frightened of from Ofsted, because if you're doing a great job, then, we will come in and we will have a professional conversation with you and everything will be fine. When I was a head teacher, I had 9 Ofsted inspections, and in the time that I was a head teacher, and there was never one inspection where I thought, oh, this is going to be a breeze, ever. Because you're constantly needing to show your best version of yourself as a school leader representing your school. It feels very high stakes. So while you've got all of that, plus you've got the expectations from government that, we'll have a much more inclusive curriculum, which I completely agree with, but it doesn't just happen. None of this can just happen. So the professional learning that we need for teachers and for teaching assistants to help them understand what is it that we can do in classrooms that means that we can offer an environment which is welcoming for every child. Now, that is completely possible to do, but you do need a whole school approach. So you need to be able to have spaces in school where children can go and calm down if they need to. You need to have a flexible approach to the timing of the school day for some children, because just arriving at the same time, everybody bundling through the door at a particular time of the day just doesn't suit some children, and that then escalates into, poor attendance. It could be those children arrive earlier and they don't necessarily join the breakfast club, but they go and have a piece of toast and a drink somewhere quietly in the library or something. Flexibility around what do we need to do for our children, for our community. And that also applies to how do we support our parents? How do we make this school really welcoming as opposed to hard to reach parents? How do we make sure we're not a hard to reach school? All of these things are possible to do and they're joyful to do, but they're hard. And it's kind of easier, I suppose, it's easier to say, sorry, these children won't fit here. Sorry, these parents can't come on our playground, they cause trouble. Sorry, it's not for you. And sorry if you want to run things differently in your classroom, but actually we're all following this plan. So it kind of feels easier if we just go for this is how it's all done around here, and let's not account for individuality. But human beings, I'm afraid, require some response to individuality.
And that leads really nicely on to learning without limits. It's such a defining part of your work, and one that I'm sure people listening will be really familiar with because that's such a massive impact on the sector. Could you just explain, maybe for people who aren't so familiar, what the theory is and where did it come from in your mind? How did that start?
Yeah, so it all began when I was doing my master's at Cambridge when my children were little, because I was studying around inclusion. And when I'd done my teacher training, I'd done an assignment about IQ tests, and I'd written an assignment and I'd sort of problematized in my mind, how is it that, is this right? Is this right that we should be seeking to measure intelligence? Can we reliably measure intelligence? And what's the impact of giving someone a score? Does that lower their own expectations of what they're able to achieve? Does it lower the expectations of people around them about what they're able to achieve? Does that then mean that it becomes a self-fulfilling prophecy? And, the opposite is true. If you're told that you're a genius, how does that impact you and the people around you and the way that you're taught? And so when I'd finished doing my master's, I was teaching in a primary school at this stage, in Key Stage 2, and I was contacted by the university and they said, we're going to have a research project. We're looking for 9 teachers across the country, both primary and secondary. We want to study classrooms where teachers are seeking not to label children. And I actually, if I'm honest, I applied for that research project because I didn't want to be rude. So I'd been asked.
It's the most English thing ever.
I know, it was a very English thing. So they phoned me and said, would you be interested? And I thought, well, it sounds interesting, and yeah. Anyway, so I agreed to be part of the research project. And then, of course, I haven't looked back since that point. So that meant that in my classroom, a researcher would arrive. She'd interview me before lessons. She'd then come and be in my classroom. She'd be taking notes, recording interviews, taking children out to talk to them. Then that meeting before the lesson started, she'd be saying, "What are you what are you planning to do this morning? What are you going to be doing?" And I'd sort of tell her. And then at the end, at lunchtime, she'd then go through what she thought she'd seen and what was interesting and so on and so forth. Never told me anything that any of the children had said when she'd taken them out for interviews, or the teaching assistant. I was like, never told me any of that. Just asked me for further questions about what had gone on. And then, exhausted, I'd then go and teach the afternoon because I wouldn't have had a lunch break. I'd have been there anyway. And then a transcript would arrive through my letterbox with a great big thud several weeks later. And I was supposed to read this transcript each time, and then we'd go to meetings at the university. But honestly, if you've ever seen your voice transcribed, so I kind of look at it like this and I think, oh no, I can't read that. So anyway, then I'd go to the university and the rest of the teachers, so the other 8 teachers, we would all be there And we'd spend the day with the researchers, and they would explore various themes that they thought were coming out of what they were seeing in our classrooms. I mean, such a privilege to be studied like that. I mean, to be a kind of human guinea pig, but for people to say, we think what we're seeing in your classroom is this. And then suddenly you kind of go, well, yes, actually, that does really resonate with me. So the three core principles that they said they saw across all of the 9 classrooms were that each of us as teachers really valued creating a climate of trust, that each of us was seeking a kind of an atmosphere of co-agency. So not just agency for the teacher, but also agency for the child, because that way there was a kind of sense anything's possible in this classroom. And then the third principle that they saw was what they called the ethic of everybody. So in each of those classrooms, it wasn't enough that the majority were engaged. It was everybody that needed to be engaged, or everybody that needed to be learning, or everybody that needed to be noticed, everybody who needed to be valued and considered. Now, those 3 principles really resonated with me, and I thought, yeah, absolutely, that is what I'm trying to do. That does feel like what I'm trying to do. And when they particularly were talking to me about my teaching, they were saying, it feels, Alison, as if you are really seeking to find a way through for every child. Now, to me, that is at the heart of what needs to be at the heart of the white paper. How do we, as a profession, find a way through for every child to be a successful learner? How do we engage other colleagues? How do we work in partnership with parents? How do we all seek to find a way through so that children can experience success in whatever form that might be? So that might be success in terms of building a tall tower with the bricks. It might be success in winning a sporting tournament. It might be success in performing a poem. Whatever it might be, beautiful artwork, teamwork, whatever it is, finding a way through so that children know what it feels like to find learning irresistible and to find an opportunity to say, yeah, I can do that. Yes, I can do that. And that comes through giving children an opportunity to challenge themselves. No one wants to be bored. So when the government started talking about high expectations, mastery learning, all those kinds of things, at the time when national curriculum levels were removed, I completely subscribed to that notion of classrooms where, as I say, anything feels possible. And for me, that is what Learning Without Limits is about. It's not about ability labeling. It's not about predetermining what a child can do. So when I hear of children, as I have done over the years, arriving in year 7, having done their SATs and then being given a CAT test and a score, and then being kind of having flight paths that are determined from year 7 through to their GCSEs. So the minute they arrive in school, they're told, well, you're going to be successful or you're not. And then actually, if you think that they're not going to do well at GCSE and you don't give them any other pathways, so essentially what you're saying is we're going to crash and burn, but keep going. How awful is that? And then we worry about why children aren't motivated to learn. So, yeah, I think there's a lot that is about that ethic of what it means to be a teacher, open-minded to what can I do to enable children to surprise me in what they're capable of. And that is unlikely to be met if everybody's following the same slides on a slide deck, and then everybody does the same task.
Yeah, that's really powerful. I can kind of hear the other side of the coin being like, schools are under huge pressure to perform good outcomes for academic success. How do the people who are like, we wish we could do that in our classroom, we wish we could do that for every child, but we are under so much pressure from the outside and that academic outcome. How can they make sure that for every child that doesn't lead to a narrow definition of success?
Well, we need to change policy. I mean, certainly we proved it when I was a head teacher, and we had teachers, hundreds and hundreds of teachers coming to visit the school. And obviously we wrote the books, Learning Without Limits, and I must have spoken at thousands of conferences. Um, on behalf of children. And, I appreciate that the challenges get more difficult when you move into the secondary sector. However, the mathematics community are completely behind the notion of not setting children, actually keeping the door open and providing opportunities for children to engage in problem solving at different levels and so on. So I think it's more than possible to do, and the notion of differentiation by outcome is one whereby if we have confidence as teachers that we can provide rich tasks that are worth engaging with, that children are able to engage with those at the level they're able to currently work at with success. But it's also about having really high aspiration. So the notion of not labeling children is not about saying all children are the same and they're all going to achieve the same outcome, la, 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 let's just shut our ears, let's not look at any data. That's not what it's about at all. But it is about an expectation that depending on the diet that we offer our children and the way in which we offer that diet will make a difference to how well they're able to grow and develop, if we're going to use that analogy. And that is a really powerful way of looking at the position of teaching. So I'm not suggesting something that is impossible to achieve. I was looking back at some video footage the other day, and I came across a little film snippet of a couple of girls who were in year 6 just before I left the school where I was most recently head teacher. So that will be it's 10 years I've been running the chartered college next year. So it will be nearly 10 years ago. There's one particular girl, let's call her Polly. And she was talking about how when she'd been in reception in year 1, she hadn't really understood what was going on, and she didn't really know how you did things. But then gradually she kind of understood, and she sort of thought, oh, so yeah, I can do this now, and I can challenge myself, and I can be more involved in it. Anyway, so it got to the point in year 6, and she's sitting there telling me, now I feel really confident, and I feel like I can do things, and it's going to be all right. Anyway, off she went to secondary school, and I hadn't sort of seen anything of her, and I thought, I wonder where she is. So I Googled her. Literally, this is literally a couple of weeks ago. I Googled her, and there she was, celebrating the fact that she'd just achieved a first-class honours degree in creative arts, dance and drama. And there's this lovely photograph of her beaming from ear to ear. And I just thought, good on you, girl. You've had that grounding as a primary student where you've gone beyond thinking, it's all a bit strange. I'm not really sure what on earth is going on, but now I found my way to find a way through to be successful, to then be able to go on and get your first class honours. And I've got many stories of children like that. And they're great to kind of look back on. They really are. It's not why you do it, but it's also really powerful, isn't it?
Yeah, it's really powerful. I think that's what it comes down to, is real lives, and these
Yeah.
pupils go on to live real lives.
That's why teaching's such a brilliant job,
Yeah.
because you're changing people's lives. I mean, you can also change them for the worse.
Yeah.
If you get things wrong, there's a huge responsibility attached to that.
And I guess one of the ways of trying not to get things wrong is being evidence informed. And you touched on it earlier, speaking about parents even knowing the reasons why you're doing things. At the Chartered College, you're really passionate about evidence informed teaching. Where do you think the gap lives at the moment between everyday classroom practice and being able to access that research, but also having the time and the resources to put it into practice?
So I love it when schools invest in school membership for their teachers, and then they have, and I always sort of say to them, it's your keen beans. It's your teachers that when you announce a new initiative or you're telling them something, they're the ones that are sitting at the front going, I've heard about this sounds good. Not the ones that are kind of slouching. There's always going to be teachers that haven't got time for something like the Chartered College because they're just like, the job's too difficult enough as it is, go away. But there are also teachers who are thirsty to improve their knowledge and so on, and they are the ones that can be so influential in your school. So those teachers, if the school is happy to invest, and it's actually not very much money. I mean, it's less money than way much less money than doing a master's to become a chartered teacher. Something like £750 across a whole series of units in total to become a chartered teacher. You study at your own pace, but you study in a personalised way. So you choose areas of your practice that you want to refine, find out more about, things that you're wondering about in your classroom. Like, I wonder what would happen if I changed my approach to teaching, I don't know, spelling or something. What if I tried this? And then you gather evidence around that and read around it and so on. Those teachers that are on that chartered pathway become so passionate about teaching. I mean, I went with 2 teachers and some colleagues from the Chartered College. We went to meet with Paul Given, who is the Education Minister in Northern Ireland. We had a meeting at Stormont, and the teachers who came with us were brilliant. I mean, they were literally saying to him, Minister, if I hadn't studied to become a chartered teacher, I don't think I'd still be in teaching. I feel like I was becoming disillusioned. I was becoming worried. But now I'm so passionate about this, that, and the next thing. And we were all kind of, yeah, what she said.
Yeah.
And actually now Northern Ireland have funded teachers to study the chartered pathway as a government initiative. Similarly, we're having conversations in Wales. In England, we had conversations right at the beginning when the MPQ pathways were developed. The DfE put together a diagram which had got the chartered route and MPQs kind of all in parallel. They decided, I guess, because they'd initially funded the Chartered College, that they were going to provide free MPQs, but the chartered route would, the teachers would still have to pay for. It's pretty hard when you're a charity and you're competing against free qualifications. But having said that, the MPQs are designed to be kind of broad brush, let's educate lots of teachers at scale. And that is great because the more that teachers are educated, the better. But the chartered route is much more bespoke. So if you're wanting to really not just follow everybody else, but kind of learn more about research and evidence as it relates to your classroom, your context, your children, then the chartered route is the route that, is really bearing fruit. And those teachers, I would love it if every school in the land had several chartered teachers and if I was education minister, I would love that because they would be the teachers that I would be able to phone up and say, we've got this idea, we've got this white paper. We're thinking about, this. What do you think? What would you advise? How might we introduce this in our school system? And they would be, because they would be evidence informed, they would be able to say, well, this is most likely to work, Minister. This is less likely to work right now. If I were you, I'd do this first.
Yeah.
Wouldn't that be great? And that is de facto building the profession that we would love to have. So with the status, the respect, we can't demand it. We have to earn it.
Yeah. You're like, oh, we should have gone back in time before the white paper if we had a few more.
There'll be other white papers,
Yeah.
let me tell you. This is the one thing, when you get to my stage in my career, there are a lot of initiatives that have come and gone over the years. But I think as a teacher, if you've always got the children as your main priority, if they are always your main focus, whatever everybody asks you to do, there's always room to be the teacher that the children can't wait to get into your classroom. I mean, I went to visit a zero tolerance school a number of years ago, and what was interesting there was that the children who were showing me around were so proud of their school. I mean, they were so proud of their school. There were silent corridors and so on and so forth. We came across one classroom where there was a teacher who just was a bit eccentric. He was teaching in a sparky kind of way, and you could just tell the children loved him. They loved him because he was confident enough. He wasn't compromising what he was teaching, but he was confident enough to do it with kind sense of humour.
I think that's really, really important, especially as we move forward, because I think there's a real conversation at the moment around what will the impact of AI and technology be on teaching. And I guess the biggest thing is teaching becomes more important because it's more human, that humour, that eccentricity, that ability to bring personality. Where do you see the future of teaching in? I know it's really hard to say because it's evolving so quickly, AI. But how do you see teaching become? I think there's a worry that it may become less important because AI can set work. There could be someone doing all the checking all the homework, doing all the marking. But where do you think the future of teaching sits in that environment?
Yeah, it's really interesting because I think we need as a profession to get ahead in terms of understanding AI can do lots of things. Children and young people can do lots of things. If we just promote the same sort of tasks that AI can do like that, why children are going to be more and more kind of like, why do I need to break out and just sweat over this when I can just press a button? So it's really about how do we create opportunities for children to engage in learning that mean that the technology can support the learning, but actually the quality of thinking, the quality of questions that we need to ask, that children need to be trained to ask, needs to be deeper. We still need knowledge. So, I'm not one of the brigade that says, well, we can just forget all about school because we've got machines to do it all for us. That would be disastrous. I do think that there is an inherent human capacity to be quite lazy. So if you know that, well, I mean, it's just, technology. So if I know that my washing machine is going to do all the washing and get it all dry and all the rest of it, I've still got to hang it up, but that's the small thing. If I'm not going to say, oh, well, I'll do it all myself because I don't want the machine to do it. So you're always going to want to find the areas where the human becomes really important. So for me, it's about collaboration, it's about teamwork, it's about collective problem solving, it's about interdisciplinary kind of engagement with big problems, big issues. My goodness me, the world's got plenty of them. It's not like we've got a shortage of things to sort out. And our young people, I think, are really worried about those big issues. So the more that they can do things that feel grounded in the real world, but are also supported by the technology, then that's really exciting. But it does require teachers to move away from the script, because the machine can generate the script,
Mm.
doesn't it? It's not just about teachers sitting on the sidelines and saying, well done. It's not that either. I think it is about the deeply intellectual endeavor, which is what teaching and learning is all about. And how do we engage AI to be part of that rather than leave it at the school gates and say, well, we're not going to have anything to do with AI here. We're going to sweat this out. And then I think it has to be a combination. I'm not sure. Um, I mean, I did sort of pontificate. I was in some meetings last year where I was sort of saying, well, maybe, maybe when AI takes everybody's jobs, which kind of, maybe it's moving in that direction, society will need to entertain itself. We're going to need to find things to do, and we're going to need to look after each other. So maybe schools should be community places where we have much more intergenerational work going on, where children learn to cook with adults from the community, garden, grow things, create new, I don't know, inventions, all kinds of things that are practical. Maybe that's part of the role of school in the future. But I don't think it's the role of school to sort of stick our fingers in our ears and say, la, 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 it's all happening over there, but we're going to do something different.
Well, I hope your future's right. It'd be nice if we go to a place where it's not robots have taken over, but we're all going back to the things that bring
Yeah.
us a bit more joy and a bit more community.
Wouldn't that be wonderful? And also a bit more place-based.
Yeah.
So if we accept that all the travel that we do is destroying the planet, maybe celebrating what we've got where we are and looking after each other and looking after our homes and our streets and our shared spaces, maybe that feels like a really worthwhile imperative.
And I think it comes back to the point around community at the start when you were saying, like it feels like we're more fractured than ever, and that leads to problems in all
Yeah.
parts of society. And
Yeah.
maybe, just maybe, AI will be the thing that it forces us all back together because we have to go back to those more basic principles of living.
Well, I hope so. I'm always an optimist, as you can tell. And I do think that education is such a force for good. I worry that some of what's been happening in our schools over the last 10 years we have got really high standards. But if that comes at a cost of high standards, not for everybody, but just for those that can hack it, that's not really a solution. It's a partial solution. So the more that we can have a school system that embraces everybody, that embraces vocational routes, understanding about, how we use our leisure time, how we can spend time together without needing to be constantly on our phones. It's an addiction. There's no doubt about it. It's an addiction. And, when you see, children playing in the park, but the mum's on the phone, you sort of think, well, children will always aspire to do what the adults can do. So the first thing they're going to want is they're going to want a phone because that's what mummy does. So we have to sort of recognise this, I think, and I do think that society increasingly is beginning to sort of think, hang on, maybe there's another way we should be doing things. It's ironic, isn't it, I was on my phone watching something which told me to put down my phone and go and do something better because you don't live forever. And it's like, oh yeah, right.
That's me told.
I'll go and do that then.
And just to wrap it up, and you said, you're an optimist.
Yeah.
And what gives you hope about the future of teaching? I think as a sector, we get quite bogged down in the negatives because there are a lot of challenges, but what gives you that sense of optimism about the next generation of teachers who are coming through?
The children. It's always the children. I mean, they are full of energy. It's an innate, I think, human condition to be optimistic, to see the best in people. And if we can make sure that we don't kind of school them out of that, children can be amazing. I mean, they can be awful as well, but I think given the right conditions, it is wonderful to be with children and young people. If I can just share with you an anecdote. So when I was in that tiny little village school, there was a boy that joined the class when he was only 4, and when I moved to the school in the next town, his mum took him out of that little school and brought him. So I then taught him pretty much through the whole of his primary career. And he was a very individual child in that he was very artistic. He loved history, but he found learning to read and write really difficult. He found maths really difficult. Anything with anything involving formal kind of learning, he found really difficult. But he clearly was very talented. I lost touch with him when I finished at the primary school, and he moved away to go to secondary school. But his mum had been in touch with me over the years, and she'd send me Christmas cards. And then just last year, I got a Christmas card from this lad, let's call him Dave, who wrote a Christmas card to me saying, I don't know if you remember me, Mrs. Peacock, I don't know if you remember me, but, I'm Dave, and I wanted to get in touch with you, and I wondered if I could come and see you, and can I bring my mum? And they'd moved to Wiltshire, and so I sort of said, well, yes, okay, come. Anyway, they arrived in the January, and Dave was now 30, which was kind of like, how did that happen? Anyway, they came in and they sat down and we had lunch, and he said to me, the thing is, I wanted to wait until I'd done something that I could be proud of before I got back in touch with you. And it turned out that he'd been excluded from secondary school. His dad had died. He had just done no exams. He got in with the wrong crowd. He started working in a factory. But then they'd realised that actually there was something to him, so he'd been promoted to the office. And then he said to me, which is, this is just where you kind of think, wow, this is what you don't expect. He said, I've always thought of myself as a writer. So here's a child that found reading and writing really hard. I've always thought of myself as a writer. His mum used to read to him constantly, lots of stories and literature and historical facts and so on. And he said, I decided that I wanted to prove that I could do it. And so I worked with a student from RADA, and she said to me I should enter a competition. And I entered a competition, and I had to write an essay, and I won it. National competition.
Oh my.
He said, and I thought you should know.
Oh
and
my.
I was like, oh my goodness.
Did you manage to hold back tears?
Well, it was just
Oh my
amazing.
God.
It was just amazing. And, So I do think those early years and primary years are really formative. There's such a rush to get children in, get them on, get them off early years, get them all sitting at desks, get them. But actually, the more that you see yourself as a learner, if at 11 you believe in yourself as a learner, if things go wrong, you've still got that sense of inner belief, hopefully, that you can come back to. And that was
What an
amazing. So
incredible story.
yeah, and so it just makes you feel so humble, doesn't it? And what other career could you have where someone might come and tell you that?
Oh, well, I can't think of a better way to have come near to the end of the podcast, Alison. What an incredible story. We like to finish the podcast with a quick fire round of 4 questions. So the first question is, what do you think is the biggest challenge facing the sector at the moment?
The accountability system.
Second question, what motivates you on difficult days?
People, children. Yeah, those kind of stories that I've shared with you today. I'll try and bring some of those up to make me think, yeah, it's all worthwhile.
Third question, what's been your proudest achievement in your career so far?
I think it had to be when I met the Queen.
Please, can you say a little bit about that? I'll allow you to expand on the quick fire for this one for the Queen.
Yeah, so I obviously I got my damehood, and I went to Buckingham Palace with my husband and 2 girls, and they said it's going to be the Queen. It was the last ceremony that she ever did, and I just remember thinking, oh my goodness, how did you get here? It was just wonderful to meet her, and I was so kind of in awe of her that when we had sort of a few words, and she said to me, "You have worked hard," and I thought, yes, I have. Yes, I have.
And when the Queen tells you that, you're like, okay, the validation.
Yeah, exactly. Yes, I have.
But
Yeah.
what an incredible full circle, like the Dave story to the moment you met the Queen. It's just like the impact is incredible. Huge congratulations.
It's amazing. It is amazing. And I still think it's sort of a pinch me kind of thing.
I'm sure it always will
be. But it has
be.
given me more confidence, I think. I mean, I think as a woman, particularly with a lot of primary experience, working in the education sector, as I do, leading the chartered college. When I first started at the chartered college, there were quite a few secondary colleagues who were quite keen to pull me down and sort of typify me as a proggy kind of. And I was like, no, this is not about prog trad. This is about children and teachers. Anyway, gave me a bit more confidence.
Yeah. As it should. I mean, once the Queen's told you, where else do you...
Yeah, exactly,
come on, guys.
Exactly. And I did used to think, well, have you got a knighthood? No, shut up.
Yeah. And the final question, what are you most looking forward to in the next academic year?
Well, it's the 10-year anniversary of the Chartered College next year. So I'm looking forward to lots of celebrating, meeting lots of members and fellows, and generally just sort of thinking, well, actually, we've created something quite amazing here. It's a vehicle to celebrate the profession, to collaborate, to share great practice, and also to sort of think, well, what might be next? So yeah, that feels really exciting.
Well, I hope you enjoy the very well-deserved celebrations of 10 years. That's amazing. And I just want to say before we wrap up, thank you so much for everything that you've done and continue to do for the sector. Like the Queen said, you have worked hard. So thank you so much for giving your time as well, because I don't know just how busy you are, but it's been lovely to meet you. And I'm sure the listeners have taken loads away.
Thank you. It's been a real pleasure.